Welcome, everybody. This is the Third Act Lawyers webinar on negating Citizens United. And we're looking forward to an interesting conversation tonight with Jeff Mangan and Tom Moore. Just a little bit of background. Third Act Lawyers is an affinity working group of Third Act National. We are one of the first working groups that were formed other than the location-based working groups. And we've been around for, gosh, I think it's maybe 3 years, maybe 4 years now. We have about 300 members in various states across the country. I would love to be able to say in every state, but I don't think that's quite true. Although we do have somebody in Hawaii, which I'm very proud of. And one of the things that we like to do is host webinars like this on topics that are of interest to lawyers and hopefully to others as well. And this topic came up when Haley Gorenberg, who I'll introduce in a minute, saw something on the web and said, "Hey, this sounds like a good idea." So the coordinating committee got together and we put this together with Haley's tremendous energy behind it. And so I'm going to let Haley take it from there.
Thank you so much, Pat. So, I think a lot of us are painfully aware that in 2010, Citizens United versus FEC unleashed unlimited corporate and dark money that's flooding our political system. And that cash flow is drowning out the voices of everyday Americans. And it's democracy warping, and this impact has been recognized for years. But a constitutional amendment to address it is to step away from the stuffy legalese, a super heavy lift. So it is terrifically exciting that our guests tonight bring us an antidote that is straightforward and achievable. Jeff Mangan is a former Montana legislator and commissioner of political practices, and he leads the Transparent Election Initiative, championing the Montana Plan that we're going to hear a lot about. And partnering with him is Tom Moore, who is a senior fellow for democracy policy at the Center for American Progress. Between them, they have graced hallowed think tank halls, town halls, and the podcast Beer Buds and Big Sky. And I recommend you check out the January 30th, 2026 episode. And now they are here with Third Act. So, welcome, Jeff and Tom. And please tell us, why do we need the Montana Plan and what's it going to do?
Thanks, Haley. We are really glad to be here. We have taken our dog and pony show to all kinds of groups, and they're always a lot of fun. Especially, I like getting questions from lawyers on this, so I'm really looking forward to the questions tonight. I'll start with what it is, and I will let Jeff talk about why it's important. This is not a campaign finance regulation. The Supreme Court has pretty much shut down any attempts to regulate corporate campaign spending through regulatory means. This is an entirely different authority that state governments have. This is the state's power to create their corporations. The first thing you learn in Corporations 101 in law school is that corporations are creatures of state law. They are created by the state. They're defined by the state. They get all of their powers from the state. For the last 100 years or so, all the states have given all the corporations all the power all the time to do basically anything that a human can do. And when the Supreme Court looked at that power grant in cases like Citizens United, it said, oh, well, this corporation is empowered just like a human is, and a human can spend in politics. They have the power to do that. So this corporation must also have the power to do that. That was all assumed in the decision. Then they started with, let's talk about their right to spend independently in elections. And what the Montana Plan does is to go a step before that and to say, like, we're not going to talk about rights. We're going to go one step back to where the powers are. And instead of a state giving all the powers to all the corporations all the time, a state is going to give all the corporations all the powers they need to do their business, except the power to spend in politics. And there's a clause in every state's law that says states can change up these powers at any time. And there's something like 2 centuries of Supreme Court precedent that says they can do that at any time. They have complete authority to do that. And that's what the Montana Plan does. It will change Montana law to just say, instead of this power grant, we're going to give you this power grant. And now the corporate political spending is ultra vires, beyond the powers of any corporation operating in Montana, and can't do it. But because it's not a regulation, it's not chipping away at the rights of corporations. That can't do that. Instead, it's redefining corporations as entities without the capacity to spend in politics. And that makes all the difference in the world. It's an entirely different power that the state is exercising. And if when a court looks at it, sure we'd be talking a lot about this. Courts have entirely different tools, and not very many, to deal with changes that states make here. And it's very important that we make this change. And Jeff will tell you all about it.
Well, thanks. Thanks, Haley, and thanks, Pep, for that nice introduction. Speaking of the Big Sky Buds and Bud or Bros, whatever podcast cast that was, we're actually going to be back on there at the end of April. They're actually doing a whole town hall type forum. It was fairly successful, and I think they'll have 300 or 400 people in the audience, so it should be a lot of fun. But I digress. When we talk about Citizens United, and you kind of mentioned the issue at the beginning, the reason it's important to me, and I'm not an attorney, because it's important to my friends, my family, my neighbors, and from that citizens perspective is, ever since Citizens United, and I have a little bit of insight to why it's important because of my role as, basically the chief law enforcement officer for campaign finance for several years in Montana. But it's everybody understands that it just drives them nuts every election year that they see, hundreds of flyers in their mailbox every week, and the advent of social media and streaming of these ads, whether it be through their phone or their tablet or their computer streaming service, whatever it might be, they're just inundated with this messaging. And everybody understands today, even though politicians tell them not to worry about it, that they don't know who's behind the messaging, and they know everybody's trying to tell them what's the right thing to do, but they cannot make an informed decision because they don't know who's spending the money, what special interest group is behind the messaging. And there's so much of it, people have just given up. And then when we talk about Citizens United and the First Amendment, and there's nothing more that can be done because it's settled law, it's, the Supreme Court will never do anything again. People have just kind of, or at least in my world around campaign finance and others, have just kind of, well, there's nothing we can do. It's, and some of us just never gave up on, well, there has to be something. And one of those persons that never gave up was Mr. Moore. And Tom found this mechanism through his other work and wrote a white paper a couple of years ago and asked me to read it, which basically had the foundation of what eventually became the Montana Plan. And I read it and said, we're doing this in Montana. And we started it the next day. And it's about letting folks know, our friends, our neighbors, and our family again, that there is a way we can deal with this influx of money and messaging in politics that doesn't violate the First Amendment, because we're going to look at it in a totally different way, in a way that no one's ever talked about before, that the solution has literally been in front of us this entire time. We just chose not to go there because we were focused on the shiny object called the First Amendment. So when we just focus in the 10th Amendment and corporate foundational law and the state's authority to determine what powers a corporation has in the first place, even people go, aha, good. We don't have to talk about the First Amendment. There is something we can do. I can become excited again that there might be an avenue to end what we've been living through for the past 16 years since Citizens United and this flood of messaging that we have. So it's easy, my job, quite honestly, other than the organizational part, but my job working with, getting folks excited about it on the ground has been the easiest job in the world. Because once you say, you believe there's too much money in politics, and everybody will say yes, we say we have a solution, that gets people excited, and they truly want a solution, and they're willing to work to make sure that that happens. And it's unlike anything I've ever seen, at least in the past decade, of folks truly wanting to do whatever they can to ensure that this happens. And that's been the exciting part about it for us.
Yeah, we pretty much have them at hello. It is a very, very easy sales job.
And can you tell us about the progress over these last months? There have been some speed bumps and they seem to be overcome. Wondering what's been learned along the way, where we are now as you move forward.
You, yeah, you bet. I'll jump into Montana and then we can talk about what's kind of happened nationally. So when we launched this a year and a half ago, we just in Montana we're lucky. We have the ability because of our constitution to amend our constitution through citizens initiative, as well as place referenda or statutory initiatives on the ballot through citizen democracy. Clearly, that's the strongest, in our opinion, the strongest way to go. And we wanted, we feel strongly that we needed to get a constitutional initiative on the ballot. And that's where we started in all of our work at the beginning, and did all the steps to get that in front of Montanans through the Montana process. To do that, and we were unsuccessful our first effort for a variety of different reasons. Our initiative was found legally insufficient, basically because, in a nutshell, that both the AG and then an agreement with the Supreme Court that it was more than one vote to change the Constitution, which isn't allowed. So we went back to the drawing board and refiled in January both a revised constitutional initiative and a statutory initiative. Which basically both ran through the process up to 2 weeks ago. The statutory initiative was found legally sufficient. We've started working on that to gather signatures. The constitutional initiative was again found by the Attorney General to be legally insufficient. We're continuing to push that through the system with the Supreme Court. But because of the calendar and the deadline for signatures being in June, we've focused on let's get the statutory initiative on the ballot. Let's get signatures. We'll still shepherd the constitutional initiative through. If we're successful, we can use that down the road. So it's not a waste of anybody's time. It's just a matter of taking advantage of the system that we have in place and making sure that we're utilizing every resource that we have available to us, because this is a marathon, not a sprint. I hate using analogies like that, but it's so apropos for what we're doing. So it is going to take a while. But we've started gathering signatures a couple of weeks ago. We have 30,000 and some odd signatures to gather from across the state of Montana. We're confident we can do that. We're doing things a bit differently than it's been done in Montana for the last decade or so. It's an all volunteer effort. We've identified we've had folks all across the state. Over 700 folks have volunteered so far to assist us in our effort. And we're starting to basically deploy that army of volunteers across the state and make this a volunteer effort versus a paid signature gathering effort. And the work has just started. So that's where we're at.
Yeah. So we have gone the ballot initiative route in Montana, and we're discovered realized as we got into this that if I had a choice, which I did not, of which state to go with first, because Jeff just took the ball and ran with it, Montana was perfect. And it not only has all of these laws set up so you can do the ballot initiatives, but it's also got a populace that's just is not a big fan of any of this. They don't like Citizens United. They don't like corporate spending. They don't like any of this. So it's actually, even though a lot of people consider it to be a very red state, it's also they're very angry about corporate political corruption and all of that. So it's perfect for that. But you don't have to do it through a ballot initiative. You can just pass a regular law. One of the reasons to do an initiative in Montana is that if the legislature, the thought was it might be difficult to get it through the legislature because they may not be just amenable to this kind of reform. But and doing a constitutional ballot initiative, there's a question in the chat about this. Doing a constitutional ballot initiative just makes it harder for a legislature to undo that. If it's a regular statutory initiative, it's just written into the statutes instead of written into the Montana Constitution. They could just undo it with another statute. But in the other states, if you've got a legislature that wants to pass it, they can go ahead and pass it. We've had bills introduced in 11 states so far. California, Georgia, Hawaii, Maryland, Minnesota, Missouri, New York, Rhode Island, Vermont, Virginia, and Washington. As far as we know, all those bills are live except in Virginia. It did not make a committee hearing. Would not be surprised if almost all, if not all of them, fall. It's very difficult to get brand new legislation through in its first year. It's a very new concept for a lot of folks. Nobody's seen a law that deals with corporate powers in a century, basically. But we've got other folks in Kansas, North Carolina, Pennsylvania that have bills in hand and may drop them this spring. And sponsors in Connecticut hope to do a bill in the next session. They've committed to sponsoring that if they're in office. In Hawaii, the bill has made it through the Senate and it's actually in the House side. It has crossed over, so it's ahead of any other state legislatively. If it passes the House and goes back to the Senate and they agree to everything and the governor signs it, then it'll be Hawaii. But the clearest path right now is Montana.
Great. And you've mentioned that people often pepper you with questions about Delaware and that corporate greatness there. So
Yeah. Yeah, the question is like, so what about Delaware? What if Delaware doesn't do this? Delaware doesn't have to do this. One of the piece that makes it work, and it's not, you kind of have to go around and do this on a couple rounds, but the piece that makes this work is that every state has a provision in its law that says no out-of-state corporation can exercise any power in this state that a domestic corporation can't exercise. So if the Montana plan passes, then no Montana chartered corporation can spend on politics anywhere in the universe. Not Montana, the US, Europe, Mars, whatever. They're out. They're out of the politics spending business altogether. But that also means that 49 states worth of corporations, every other corporation, every Delaware corporation, every Texas corporation, every California corporation can't spend in Montana's politics either. And it's what's striking about this. It's the ballot issues. Can't spend in that because it's covered by that. And can't spend in local, state, or federal elections. Because, as you said, all corporations get all their powers from the state. They get their powers to spend in local elections from the state. They get their power to spend in state elections from the state. They get their power to spend in federal elections from the state. It's one of the very few things where you can make a state law change that affects any kind of behavior on the federal level. But this is one of them. And there's no federal law that's conflicting with any of this. State law controls corporate creation and definition. So if Montana ends up being the only state that ever passes this, Montanans will be delighted. They will have fixed their politics top to bottom. They'll have gotten all the corporate and dark money out of this. And the reason you get the dark money out is because this is not just business corporations, it's also all the nonprofits, all the Cs, the C3s, C4s, C5s, C6s, which include all the dark money groups, includes all the unions, it includes things like the big chambers of commerce and that kind of thing. They can do everything that they did before Citizens United, talk to their members and endorse and lobby and do all these things. They just can't write a check out of their treasury into elections directly. So there it is.
great. Great.
Yeah, there was a question I wanted to address. I addressed a little bit in the chat, and who's going to oppose this? Well, you can guess who's going to oppose this. Corporations, industry groups. As a matter of fact, they once the ink was dry on our statutory initiative, and the very conservative Attorney General and Secretary of State certified it for signature gathering. In less than a day, the chamber and industry group sued the state of Montana to stop us from gathering signatures or stop the process. In a sense, to be honest, it was a gift for us. Them spouting their free speech rights under the First Amendment while stepping on the and covering the mouths of folks that want to go and gather signatures to place, to use exercise their freedom to place it on the ballot. But I digress. That's working its way. That's it's only been a week or so since they filed, and we will be filing to intervene and defend if we need to. But that's what we expected, and we also expect oppositions from folks that would normally support things such as this. When we launched this, we made sure that there are no loopholes, no exceptions. How legislation, and we're all used to regulation, that there has to be a loophole or an exception somewhere for a friend, or depending on what political party is supporting an issue or a law or a bill. Here it affects C corps, S corps, LLCs, nonprofits, C3s who should be spending in elections anyway. C4s, which is a conduit for all the dark money, and has been that vehicle for the billions of dollars we're now seeing every year in elections for dark money that everyone wants to complain about. Unions and associations. So while their membership love the Montana plan, the leadership or the administration of those, I call them good C4s and bad C4s. The good C4s that do good social welfare work, but also spend in elections because they've had to over to keep up over the last 16 years. They don't like it so much because they don't necessarily want to change the way they do business. And we've been in this vicious cycle where, well, we'll just raise more money next year, or we'll just, outspend them, in this area, rather than just kind of admitting that, I'll say it. I don't want to upset anybody, but, we need folks in those leadership orgs to have the courage to stand up and say, no, it's wrong. Dark money is wrong. We can't stand up and say it's wrong for the other side, but not wanting to do it ourselves, because it may affect the way we do business. If it affects everybody the same, everybody's on the same playing field. Once this passes, people should see that as a good thing, and a way to be creative, and kind of get back to maybe not spending as much money hiring consultants and fundraising firms and polling and signature gathering for whatever it might be, and actually just get out and start talking to the citizens and why an issue is important or not, and that kind of messaging. And but we understand why it's a heavy lift for that, because that's the world that we've had since Citizens United. Everybody said that's where we were going to go. Of course, the other side didn't. So, oh no, it'll be fine. There won't be that much money. But we all know exactly what happened. It's just the numbers speak for themselves, and we have lots of data and charts that we like to show. And it's not very hard to go from down here to all the way up here, straight line up from what happened since 2010. And so people understand that. They just don't necessarily want or think that it's going to be an easy change, or should it be a change that doesn't need to be this drastic. We all want to say we're against it, but maybe that's a bit too drastic. Well, we're in that era that we all agree that we can't regulate these general powers anymore on the campaign finance side. We have to look at solutions that we haven't looked at before, like on the corporate side, and move that vision over here. Say, okay, this is where we can address this issue. And let's just have the courage to do it. So
one of the disappointing things Jeff and I have found, it's not terribly surprising, but it's for a lot of groups, a lot of people, it's a lot easier to be against Citizens United when you don't think anybody's actually going to fix it. And there's been pushback from groups that are just trying to defend their current business model, which is too bad. It's regardless of which side is spending and raising and spending the dark and corporate money, it's this is the most corrosive and unaccountable communications in our politics. And I don't care who's raising and spending dark money. Like those are those are the communications that are destroying Americans' faith in their democracy. That's the most negative. It's the most, and there's no way to tie it back to anybody. There's no way, the all the parties and the candidates can disclaim any kind of accountability because there was independent spending. We couldn't stop them. And when you go to the group, they don't have to cough up any names. And so it's just all this, gross stuff that comes up, and you can't stop it the way we did stop it for the first 200 years of our history, where it's like if there was an ad that was super offensive, you could go see who paid for it, and basically, or hold that person accountable, hold that candidate accountable.
So actually, to pick up on that, we have a question in the chat, and I'm looking for us to lift up those questions so that everybody can hear your marvelous responses. But there was a question about super big money independently, the billionaires
Right.
individually, and maybe you're starting to get into that about what the accountability is once you take out the big dark money, but you have some big individual money. So if you could say more about that, that'd be great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll just take the statement, and I'll let Tom. You know, that's one of the most common. One of the common questions we get, and and actually, I'll let Tom answer that part of it on the common cause question earlier too. That
Thanks.
yeah, we understand that billionaires certainly can still spend under the Montana plan, or put the only difference the difference is under the Montana plan to be fully disclosed and transparent, so at least the individuals will know who's spending in their election versus it being hidden or anonymous through a C4, and then the C4 giving to a PAC to spend anonymously. It's we don't address that individual spending in the Montana plan, just the disclosure and the transparency portion of it, by getting it certainly out of corporate and corporate hands. It's when we'll use Elon Musk, 'cause I think it was used in that the conversation, and whether or not you support or not support, they do. He did in the Wisconsin justice races last year. He was very vocal about it. Was his money in there, and how much money he was spending. And when folks in Wisconsin knew who was spending in their elections, they likely took that into account. And versus whether or not the money would have been spent just through an anonymous, would they have taken, would they have looked at it any differently? We think people probably do. They take into account if they know who's spending in elections, and they can use that to make an informed decision on the candidates and/or issues in front of them. It'll assist in making that informed decision versus, I don't know who Mothers Against Dark Skies in Montana is. But I do know who this person is, or you can track what they do. I mean, the whole idea behind disclosure and transparency in the first place was exactly that. And what they said would be available under Citizens United, and lift up the FEC to do their jobs. We all know that didn't happen either. Oh yeah, we like disclosure because they'll have disclosure here, and we know that wasn't the case. So. We can address the millionaire problem or the billionaire problem later, but at least we're addressing the disclosure there, and limiting the ability for them to use either their corporation or C4s or shells to hide that money in the first place.
Yeah, this mechanism that's the heart of the Montana plan can only affect corporations. It only redefines corporations, and it does not. It does not touch individuals spending. And that doesn't, and actually the ability of Elon Musk to spend an unlimited amount of money in elections doesn't stem from Citizens United. It stems from a case 50 years ago, Buckley v. Vallejo, that basically said that an individual cannot be stopped from spending an unlimited amount of money in their own race or generally. Harvard law professor Larry Lessig got a ballot initiative passed in Maine that basically regulates super PACs like PACs and says, like, fine, this unlimited spending that Citizens United unleashed, fine, can't stop that, but only $5,000 in. We're going to regulate that because the unlimited money in was not part of Citizens United. It was another DC Circuit case called Speech Now, decided later in 2010, and it's been adopted by every circuit in the country except the First Circuit, where Maine is. So they're making a run at that. And basically, if these two reforms pass and you get all the dark and corporate money out of the system and then limit the amount of money that any one individual can give to any one political committee, that is the full solution. I think you got to do both. It's got to be two different solutions for that. It's got to be two different mechanisms. I think the Montana plan um, has much brighter prospects than the other half of it for right now. Um, but again, at the end of the day, you will, yes, Elon Musk dumped a gigantic amount of money into the 2024 election and put his name attached his name to a lot of it. I'm sending a link from the New York Times. He didn't attach his name to all of his spending. He's got this web of LLCs in Texas that are throwing all kinds of money into politics and not attaching his name to it at all. So, it would at the end of the day, if this reform gets implemented, all the money's coming from individuals and all the money is disclosed. That's not perfect because one individual can still spend a gigantic amount of money, but at least it will be disclosed. That is so much better than the system we have now.
So this is a gutsy and elegant approach, and also gutsy in the comment. I see people are asking about litigation and Supreme Court, and you seem to be sort of welcoming it, like grooving to that. Can you say more
Yeah.
about that, please?
The expectation is it'll go straight to the Supreme Court. I mean, they would, I'd be shocked if they didn't, take up the challenge to the Montana plan the minute it passes and gets through those circuits. But there are a lot of things that, this doesn't actually violate any Supreme Court precedent at all. It does not violate Citizens United. Citizens United took a fully empowered Virginia corporation and said, oh, you've got the power, so you've got the right. This would create corporations, redefine them, change them, their very essence into a different kind of object that just doesn't have the power to do that. If that corporation walks into court and sues on this, that's a very, very different plaintiff. So, there's literally not a single Supreme Court precedent that you'd have to overturn in order to uphold the Montana plan. To flip the Montana plan, you would have to shatter foundational corporation law. You would basically be federalizing and constitutionalizing corporation law in a way that it has never been before. You'd be telling states that ultra vires enforcement, that there are limits to that, which the court has never said before. You would be potentially disrupting the ability of 25 states that have constitutionalized their corporation creation power, disrupting their ability to create corporations at all and throwing into doubt the existence of the corporations they've already created because you've set up this new constitutional rule that their state constitutional provisions can't handle. And also there are things like this, national banks. First National Bank of Boston, National Bank. Those banks were created by the National Banking Acts of the 1860s. Those acts were written the way all corporations charters were written in the 1800s. It's a bunch of enumerated powers that deal very, very tightly with banking. And then a little catch-all that doesn't say everything a person can do or anything you need to do in your business, things that are incidental to banking. And these have been very, very tightly to the enumerated list of powers. And ever since the 1860s, there's never been a case, never been a court that has held or even suggested that these banks have the power to spend in elections. So the question of can the government create a corporation in America that doesn't have the power to spend in elections? We know the answer is yes, because we've been doing it since the 1860s. That is all Montana is proposing to do with the Montana plan. Create corporations, all of its corporations, without the power to spend in elections. So a lot of this is, although it's a new application, like no one's seen this, no one's written a corporate powers law in a century, these are all incredibly old provisions, incredibly old but never, ever overturned law that is absolutely foundational to American corporation law. So it's new, and a lot of people just kind of have PTSD from watching every bit of campaign finance regulation and law get shredded by the court over the last 20 years. But this is corporation law. You can't just like blink and make it go away. They would have to dismantle quite a bit to get to it.
And then it's exactly the reason why corporations now and industry groups are really focusing again. They just want all we're hearing from them is free speech, free speech, free speech, free speech. First Amendment, First Amendment, First Amendment. settled that this has been done. Don't look here, don't look at any other law because this is exactly, I mean, they're trying to, that's how they're attacking this. And they don't want they don't want folks they don't want folks to know that there's other avenues, there's other amendments,
Yeah.
there's other ways to look at, not regulation, but this kind of foundation, how corporations are created in the first place. Um, they've, no one's talked about that for over 150 years so we start talking about it, and it's not only, I'll get a little far afield here and then I'll bring it back for Tom to answer the common cause question. Uh, it's not just, may not be just campaign finance or regulation here. It's like, we're having these conversations about states' rights and AI versus, should it be, do this, the states have the right to, or the power to do that, to talk about what corporations can do or not do when it comes to AI or just AI in general. Housing crisis. I've had a couple of very, state legislators here thinking kind of an epiphany when we're just talking about campaign finance. And they don't want to talk about campaign finance, but they say, oh, what about housing? And these corporations buying up all this housing, and it's causing problems for states. And I mean, it's so there's people are starting to think about it differently and at least moving away from that First Amendment free speech, that the mechanism itself makes sense. So
Yeah.
anyway, I kind of went on field. I apologize.
There's a temptation to conflate powers and rights and to say like, no, the court will just collapse them and that's it. They are fundamentally different. The powers that a state gives away is part of the creation of the thing, the definition of the thing, and the regulation, the rights, and all that is this subtractive power that the state has. And the best way that I've learned to illustrate this is, I'll ask you, Haley, do you have the power to fly? And I mean, flap your arms and fly.
I try so hard, but it hasn't happened.
No, none of us were given that power by our creator. We are defined as entities without the power to do that, without the capacity to fly. And if the Supreme Court came out tomorrow and said, hey, good news, everybody has a constitutional right to fly, would you go to the roof and give it a shot?
I think it's
No.
not happening. Yeah.
Not happening. Because regardless of what a court says, even the Supreme Court says about your right to do something, if you don't have the power to do it, that is a reality that no court can change. That is, we do not have that power. We were not given it by our creator. So when the question arises like, hey, why doesn't this violate the First Amendment? It's like the same thing goes for corporations. If the creator of a corporation, the state, has just defined it as an entity that doesn't have the capacity to spend in politics, it kind of doesn't matter what a court says about whether it has a right to do that, even a First Amendment right to do that, because without the power to do something, the right doesn't have anything to attach to. It doesn't change the underlying reality that corporation doesn't have the power to do that. And the Supreme Court literally has never, ever said that states have to give their corporations any particular power. Certainly, they've never said that they have to give them the power to spend in politics. Citizens United didn't say that. Bilotti didn't say that. None of the cases have said that. Jeff keeps wanting me to go back to common cause, and I will. We've talked to dozens of groups, hundreds of lawyers, lots of policy people as we've been pursuing this. Maybe the most disappointing conversations have been with Common Cause. I am the former board chair of Common Cause Maryland, and there's a split in Common Cause. State affiliates are all for this. They see what's going on the ground. They see the advantages of this. They are, they're just fighting the good fight, and they don't take a lot of other things into account. Common Cause National has decided they're going to sit this one out. They have decided that there are, as long as billionaires can continue to spend, that we really do continue to need dark and corporate money in our system. So until you fix the whole problem, we don't fix any of the problem. I believe Jeff and I, vehemently disagree with that. This is a major reform. It will make, even if this is the only reform that ever gets done, it'll be a much better system than what we have now. But other groups like Issue One Uh, Public Citizen and Citizens United, Free Speech for People are all on board with this. Groups like the Campaign Legal Center, are providing us legal help. We are trying to get other groups to endorse it as well. Hope to get some more, but that is where Common Cause is on this issue. Thanks for asking that one. It's important to get that out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so we can dip back into the questions, but I think I'm not going to wait till, any longer really to ask you how eager people in our circle and who will view this not only now but afterwards can get involved. We like to say that we're third act and we want to get off the sidelines and roll up our sleeves. So how can we jump in and take action?
We've TEI has moved from, kind of focusing on Montana to because of the work, Tom has done reaching out to other states. We were the kind of the natural catalyst to, or I shouldn't say catalyst, we were, almost the receptacle of how can I do this in my state? What can we do? And as we start building our network and talking about what's happening in Montana and that and you can do this in your state too kind of conversation, we were almost, we were happily forced into kind of taking on that role of engaging on the ground and listening to folks. And so what we've started doing while we're focusing in Montana is identifying groups and other states that we can partner with to assist them getting this effort off the ground in their states, where if we have folks reach out to us, we can refer to our partners in those states, point out what's happening potentially legislatively, work on, if you're one of the 24 states, where you can have a ballot measure, and they're like-minded folks, which there are many, that what that would look like in 2027 or 2028 or whatever that calendar looks like. So we've had conversations like this, but with those smaller groups in several states now: Washington, Colorado, Florida, Pennsylvania, and California, others. So we are attempting to be that conduit to assist in developing that network of engaged citizens on the ground to either focus on a ballot, and depending on where you are in the state or in the nation, focus on a ballot initiative or a constitutional initiative, or working with these groups to talk to their legislators about whatever bill or bills might be progressing and why it's important that they look the same as they are introduced, and not changed as they go through the process. We're all, one of my biggest fears with this, and it's the beauty of a statutory or a constitutional initiative, but people have control of that through the entire time. Don't have to worry about my colleagues changing the bill by the time it gets to November, for example. It's going to be the same, the same from start to finish. That certainly isn't the case with legislation or a bill, as it goes. Any legislator, any committee, any house, any side of the house, whatever it might be. There could be significant changes, and at the end of it, you might have a bill that gives more dark money to certain groups versus one that ends dark money, for example. So it's really important when we start talking to other states and get people excited that they have to have that same passion and engagement to work with their legislators and work on the ground to make sure the vehicle remains viable throughout that process. That's kind of what we've been doing. It's slow baby steps in a sense, but we're able to. We've just started working and cooperating with other groups in different states. March on Harrisburg, one comes to mind, and in Pennsylvania, we've been talking about it too, and a group in Washington and in Colorado. That part's been really exciting for us because it is bringing everyone together. We don't want necessarily 50 different efforts. If we can assist in making it one large effort with lots of little tentacles, but it's going to be stronger if we do it that way versus all these little tiny efforts. So
yeah, I, I'm really, as this year progresses, I realize that I'm kind of like it's like the job Pope Benedict had before he was Pope. He was like, he was the prefect for the doctrine of the faith. I have to, I'm testifying in legislatures all over the country, saying like, okay, let's amend it this way. Let's keep it back here. Let's get back to this structure. I think once the Supreme Court approves this, if they do, it'll be a lot less important to get the bills exactly right. But for the first bill or the first group of bills that gets challenged, you want to make sure that none of them stray into regulation, that none of them, that they keep kind of this very powers-based structure. Um, but what would be helpful from third way lawyers is, to, and this is you do hear this all the time, like reach out to your state legislators and tell them about this. This is an incredibly potent ask. We have gotten, I've done almost no affirmative outreach to state legislators on this. They have come to us. They have seen what's going on in Montana. They have looked at Jeff's website and said, "Oh, we should do that." Sometimes they just introduce their own bill, and I find out about it later, and then I got to go scramble to make sure that it's okay. Some of them turn out to be great. Sometimes a legislator hands the idea to Leg Council, and they write up a standard campaign finance bill full of restrictions and bans and so forth. It's like, oh, can't do that. That will get struck down in 10 seconds. You got to keep it on the power side. So, but the more people who are involved and know what's going on and know what's important about how these things are built, that is incredibly helpful. Because Jeff and I can't watch everything everywhere all the time. We can't testify everywhere. The more folks who are out there and can say like, no, this is the way, that amendment that you're considering, committee, should not be approved because X, Y, and Z. That is helpful. That can be unbelievably helpful. But the number of legislators who have come to me and said, I got 3 calls from constituents about what's going on in Montana, and they said I should do this, and so I'm calling you. Multiple states have done this, and so it's one of these things where it's people are super jazzed about it when they hear about it, which is great. And then actually legislators, if you get the right legislator, it really does get their attention, and people have been moving on it when their constituents bring it to them, which has been kind of exciting.
So, as we're talking about these action steps, people are getting excited about connecting in their states. And you all make yourself fairly available with your emails and approachability. So, do you want us to be writing to you? Do you want to lift up the email or the contact information out of the comments so everybody can hear it? What would you like us to do? Because we've got plenty of
Yeah.
energy going on here.
I put my email in the chat, and also just transparentelection.org. We have forms for interest, contact forms. We won't spam you or anything like that. But we can get you hooked up, or we can at least start working with, depending on what your state is, connect you to the folks that we're working with, or know that there's at least enough interest in the state to start that process there. While we are spread thin, one of the things that's really important to me, just personal to me, is that it's more important to me that this remain a citizen-driven, grassroots, true movement. I don't want this turned over to a cabal of consultants and politicos and those type of things that are going to bastardize it in a sense, for their own edification, for whatever purposes in their state. The only way this will work is if people remain excited and trust the people that are moving the efforts in their states, and can believe that it is something truly that can happen, and not into why we have to do this in the first place. Citizens United, while it was a catalyst, so to speak, lots of folks jumped in to make it a reality of how bad it is today, and that's the reason that they don't want to necessarily change the way they do business either. And that's that's just as big of a problem as what happened in 2010. And the only way we're going to fix it is if folks truly believe that their folks in their state have their interest at heart. We'll work with them, and they have the ability to roll up their sleeves and make change in their own communities, in their own states, and feel good about it. And so if it takes me being spread thin from 50 different states and a little sleep as we go through this, that's what we're willing to do.
Yeah, there's plenty of time to sleep when we're dead.
So
Let me just jump in for just a second and remind folks, save the chat. There's a lot of good stuff in there already. We will circulate it with the recording, but that's going to be a couple of days, So if you want the websites and the links to the papers and everything, and the email addresses, save the chat now.
And let's put into what we're talking about here that we've got some great resources here. Like Pat says, they'll be circulated, but also there's Tom's pointing out the corporate power reset, the CAP fact sheet that we can use, and then there are even PDFs that are compact and that people can use to share with legislators or people who you're organizing with. So there are some great sort of off to the races materials that are available and already developed.
Yeah, and Jeff's web resources are terrific. They're very, very informative.
We've created websites for small business and put as many resources and FAQs and those type of things as we possibly can across all of our materials. But we're also creating purposely the way that we're doing things that they can be replicated, or we can easily replicate them for other states, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel and we don't have to spend a lot more money we really want to make this open source is not the right word, but really want to make it available and easily accessible for everybody, no matter where they're at in their journey on this in their state. So,
yeah.
Terrific. So those resources, transparent election, Montana plan, it's all there for us, and you're very available, and it's much appreciated. Really, change making, and people are excited at partnering with you to participate in making that really important change.
Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic to have you with us here this evening. Pat, are we ready to close out from your point of view?
Well, I think we might be. I did have one last little question. I've been this whole time here, I've been trying to imagine what an ad campaign against you would look like. And Jeff, has it gotten to that point in Montana? What are the opponents actually? What's their case? How do they argue this?
Well, we haven't seen the full power and fury of those interests yet. They've let it, but their first really volley was the lawsuit against the state to stop us from even gathering signatures. But it's exactly what we expected, that we are violating the business's First Amendment right to speak. It's settled law. You shouldn't even be trying this. It's a waste of time and money. Stop gathering signatures. Why would you even consider trying to change this? Because boom, boom, boom.
I believe our favorite so far
is focusing on small business, and that we'll hurt small business in the state. And in Montana, we didn't talk about history, but we had the Corrupt Practices Act in place since 1912, where corporations couldn't spend in our elections. That was in place all the way through Citizens United for 100 years. Small business or business didn't go fleeing in the night because someone, dare say that they can't spend in an election. So, we are really embracing our legacy for that, but we fully expect them to just continue on. Jeff Mangan is trying to stop us from speaking, and he's a horrible person. And the more that they say that, quite honestly, I think it just helps that Jeff Mangan is really speaking for citizens and small business.
Right.
And that's kind of how they're gonna, if they spend that kind of money, it's really gonna be, this is exactly why we need the Montana plan. Look at what they're throwing at you and how, we're not dumb.
I think our
Yeah.
favorite criticism so far is that it's a solution in search of a problem. It's like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
we'll do the billboard for that one, all right?
Right.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
can tell you what the
But
problem is.
yeah,
Well,
we search is over. Yeah, so
yeah. Guys, I just want to thank you again. This was really both fascinating and entertaining. And there's clearly work that we can do, which is
yeah,
always important. As Haley said, they call us third act, not third sit on the sidelines. So we're always looking for something to do.
Yeah.
good.
Okay.
Yeah,
We need that courage. We need people to show that courage. Thank you so much.
yeah,
I mean, Haley did it right away, called me up in a cold call.
yeah.
It was wonderful. So thank you, Haley. We appreciate
Yeah.
it.
But
And
one of the
folks,
great
go
okay.
ahead.
Yeah, no,
One of the great
Well,
things about this
appreciated
project
you.
is that we it's giving people some agency. I've been told for the last 16 years that they have no
Yeah.
agency in any of this, that they can't do anything. And this is
Yeah.
really, it's like you can do things in your state to
Exactly.
change this. And it really kind of is at a moment when a lot of people need hope in their ability to affect their democracy in any way. This is really giving people a lot of that. And it's real.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, terrific. We will circulate the recording and the chat as soon as we can. Meanwhile, before we all leave here, save the chat one more time so you get all the links that are in there. Tom and Jeff, thank you once again. And I'm sure you'll be hearing from lots of us.
Good.
Thank
Looking
you.
forward
Have
to
a
it.
good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks so much.